So there are growing suspicions that Russian intelligence officers are behind a mysterious illness called Havana Syndrome. Individuals suffering from it have reported a range of neurological symptoms. There are now at least 130 suspected cases across at least 6 countries. And CBS News has learned that they often occur near active Russian operations. Catherine Herridge spoke to a former CIA officer who says that he was a victim. Catherine, what can you tell us?
Well, Anne-Marie, good morning. CBS News has learned the U.S. government is fast-tracking sensor technology to detect these mysterious energy events as a CIA veteran goes on the record about the most devastating attack of his career.
This is an act of war against U.S. officials.
A seasoned CIA officer, Mark Polymeropoulos ran clandestine operations across Europe and Asia. So when he traveled to Moscow in 2017, the watching eyes of Russian intelligence did not faze him.
Even in my hotel room, I'd go to the gym and a guy in a black trench coat comes down and checks on me down there. And so not unexpected, part of the job.
Then in his hotel room, the trip took a dangerous turn.
I woke up in the middle of the night because I had this incredible case of vertigo. It felt almost as if I was in some kind of, carnival ride. And I'll tell you, Catherine, I'd spent years in war zones of Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd put my life on the line. This was the most terrifying experience of my life. I had no control.
Back in the U.S., Mark reported to the CIA medical office.
I said, is this consistent with Havana Syndrome? And their answer was no.
Havana Syndrome is the name given to a mysterious neurological condition, first reported by State Department personnel in Cuba 5 years ago, who experienced a similar set of symptoms.
Pressure in the head.
Yes.
Loss of balance.
Yes.
Ringing in the ears.
Yes. I mean, I've had a headache for 3 years. It feels like a vice clamp down here, and then there's pressure that comes over the top of my head.
Mark says it took 3 years to get help at the Walter Reed Military Hospital.
They diagnosed me with a traumatic brain injury. It's on paper. I have it. I was there when he did this, but he actually takes the paint and he throws it against the canvas.
Mark's CIA colleague, who was also affected, painted this picture called The Gunshot during their Walter Reed art therapy sessions.
This is the invisible wound that, no one believed us for a long time.
The National Academies of Sciences recently found the most plausible explanation was pulsed radio frequency energy. There are no public images of the alleged device. A knowledgeable source told CBS News the technology behind this Russian-made microwave generator from the 90s is likely similar to today's smaller mobile units. In recent months, 2 suspected cases were reported near the White House.
This is clearly an escalation.
Republican Senator Susan Collins authored legislation that gets victims medical and financial support.
This bill will provide much-needed assistance to the employees of the intelligence community, the State Department, and other federal agencies.
In a moment of rare bipartisanship, the Senate passed the bill unanimously last week.
Is Russia responsible?
Russia is certainly a likely suspect. President Biden should send an unmistakable message to the Russians that if they are behind these attacks, they must stop them immediately. We have to have full cooperation from the Russians, or they must be made to pay a price.
Still unable to concentrate for more than a few hours at a time, Mark made the hard decision to retire from the agency he loves.
Who feels safe to serve now overseas with this happening? My contention is it's the Russians, but whatever adversary is doing this certainly has not seen anything from the U.S. government that's telling them to stop.
In a statement to CBS News, the CIA said nothing is more important than taking care of CIA officers, both by ensuring that they get the care and treatment they deserve and making sure that we get to the bottom of what caused these incidents. Anne-Marie.
All right, then keeping that in mind, the Biden administration is forming 2 panels of experts to study this mysterious illness. What can you tell us about those panels?
What the panels are trying to discern is the exact mechanism that causes this kind of brain damage that in so many cases is lasting. And secondly, what they call attribution. So who or what is behind these directed energy events? Is it an intelligence service? Is it a nation, or is it some other entity, though all of the evidence based on our reporting focuses squarely on Russian intelligence, Anne-Marie?
Well, it is good news to hear that even though those questions have not been answered, they're still taking time out and money out to support people who've been victimized. And because often, all those questions have to be answered before you can ever get any acknowledgement that, a mysterious illness actually exists. But when it comes to this bipartisan piece of legislation that was passed unanimously for financial support, what does it entail? What sort of help are the victims of Havana Syndrome going to be getting?
Well, just to underscore the fact that there's so little bipartisanship here in Washington, that to get a unanimous vote on a piece of legislation is really quite extraordinary. And it speaks to the sense of urgency that's felt by people on the left and the right-hand side of the aisle. The legislation effectively allows intelligence agency heads, the Secretary of Defense, more latitude to get their people medical support and financial support. In the case of Mark Polymeropoulos, who we profiled, it took him 3 years to finally get to Walter Reed, where he was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. And that's after initially having his symptoms dismissed by the CIA medical office, that eventually came around to the fact that this was not something in his head, but in fact there had been some kind of event that had permanently damaged parts of his brain, Anne-Marie.
I can't imagine what those years were like, because I'm sure anyone who would listen, he was trying to sort of argue that this is a legitimate thing, and I'm sure he was dismissed by many before. So we heard Senator Collins say that, the president needs to bring this up with Vladimir Putin. The two leaders are meeting on Wednesday. Do we know if Havana Syndrome is part of what they'll be talking about?
Well, it's a couple of days ahead, and a lot can happen between now and then. But certainly the officials we spoke with said it's extremely important for President Biden to bring this up directly with Vladimir Putin. They said the most effective way would be to do it in a private rather than a public setting. But what we heard universally is that no administration, whether it's been Republican or Democrat, has really pushed back significantly enough that whoever is responsible is backing off. They say this injury is really the equivalent of a battlefield injury for our soldiers. But in this case, it's often intelligence officers who are affected. And so they may not be carrying a weapon, but in many respects, they're bearing the same kinds of wounds of someone who was blown up in a tank or by a suicide bomber, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, I tell you, it's really scary hearing in your story that there were cases close to the White House, and we know that this has affected, people working in State Departments for other countries, including Canadians as well, who are working down in Cuba. Catherine, thank you so much.
You're welcome.